Yes, so welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Laurence Fox, who is an actor. I'm probably best known for playing DS James Hathaway in Lewis, also a singer-songwriter and a political activist more recently, which is what this interview will focus on. So first of all, Laurence, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Now, you kind of shot to prominence in January when you appeared on Question Time. Were you very political before that, or was that kind of your political awakening?
I think I think a lot of people are sort of slightly political, aren't they, in their lives? So I think I was probably political from around the dinner table as a child, because my parents would encourage us to have, strong, robust discussions about things that were going on. We were very much a family that ate together a lot, and Sunday lunches were either terrifying for guests or really inspiring and fun. But yeah, nothing was off limits, really. So I think it's been in my blood for a while. I just kept it quiet. Or maybe I didn't keep it quiet. The world changed and it suddenly became noisier.
How did you end up on Question Time? Did they just approach you and say, kind of, are you interested in politics? Or was it, did someone who knows you speak to them?
I had gone to the day before, I had gone, because I was releasing an album, and the day before I'd gone to speak to Nihail on Radio 5 and sing. And then they were like, do you want to do Question Time on the day after? Because it's in Liverpool, it's just across, hop on one of those really terrible northern trains and nip across from Manchester to Liverpool. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Who cares? And I went on Question Time and sort of said what I would have said while watching Question Time on the TV. And it just happened.
Almost not quite by accident, but certainly by chance.
Yes, it's certainly. Well, I'd done a trigonometry or two, so I was keen in the area. But yeah, I wasn't in any way anticipating the reaction.
Were you surprised by just how aggressive the reaction was?
Yes, I was totally surprised, because I know that the view that I was expressing is an extremely commonly held view in the country, and because as an actor you work with all sorts of people, from chippies to sparks to diva actors and actresses to very precious writers. Every sort of person gets involved in show business. So I'd known that these views were sort of fairly mainstream views, and so I was completely shocked, yes, that it was greeted with the reaction it was greeted with.
I found that there are some professions, so I found there's a lot of comedy and a little bit of academia, where there's a kind of this set established view, but there's a lot of people who don't agree with it but aren't prepared to speak up publicly. They're scared for their jobs or their careers, etc. Is acting kind of similar? Are there a lot of actors who are secretly very critical of the kind of the rise of ultra identity politics, who they can't speak out, or is it very much a minority of you?
I think that there are many actors who aren't in part of the the modern monoculture view, that they do keep themselves pretty much themselves. So I suppose it's not so much about the views; it's more about one's right or ability to share your views. That's where the problem rises. But certainly, actors, I feel. Well, I feel for actors, myself included, because you're working from one job to the next, and you're only ever as good as your last job. So as a business, it encourages you to toe the line ideologically with what's happening. So and as producers and commissioners become more and more woke on television, etc., then there are certain lines that have to be towed. And certainly, when I did my last acting job, I got the job in the room, and then there was a big long pause for a few weeks while they discussed whether they should have hired someone of a different skin color to myself. And then and I thought, oh, well, that would be such a shame for everybody. I didn't see it as a way of winning, because someone would have got a job based mainly on their skin color, which is, no one would ever want to get a job based on that level, and B, that they wouldn't have been first choice, and then C, I wouldn't have been able to feed my children. Yeah. So it felt like a lose-lose for everybody.
Well, it's interesting that you mention kind of pressure to conform. Are there some actors who've kind of come up to you privately and said, we really agree with what you're saying, we like what you stand for, but publicly we just can't support this.
Oh, of course, yes, and there are loads, but the ones that are the worst aren't necessarily always actors. They're the ones who will really have a go at you on Twitter, and then in your private DMs they'll go, "Oh, I'm only doing it because that's the view that's I've got to have." So,
apologising to you.
What's that? Sorry.
Almost apologising to you privately for.
Yes, they're slagging you off in public and then apologising, or at least sort of justifying their position in private. So it just goes to show that that's where we're at in this very sort of self-censorious, monochrome, monocultural world that we're in. So actually, in a funny way, much as I adore acting, and I think it's the most brilliant thing, and I spent 22 gorgeous years doing it, I wouldn't really want to be involved at the moment. Not much that inspires me.
Is acting becoming more political then? I mean, is it harder than it was to have non-conformist opinions?
Well, I suppose it's what one judges as a non-conformist opinion. I mean, as I said, I think my opinion is pretty mainstream. And if you look at the last, the last time that people have been asked to vote for something, for example, people tend to be pretty surprised what the proles, as Orwell calls them, tends to vote for. So yeah, it was that's how it is, really.
I mean, there are whole professions I found where certain views, which are, as you said, quite commonly held in the country, are regarded as being quite unusual. So I think Brexit brought this to the fore. I mean, personally, I voted for May, but I mean, I was in university at the time. Sorry, I went to university shortly after. And in academia, the idea of someone voting leave was just preposterous. And I think it's the same in quite a lot of professions. I mean, do you think it's kind of exposing the split within the country?
Yes, I think it's really sad, because in order to have a really good debate about anything, you need to have, it needs to be sort of finely balanced, doesn't it? For the debate to take place. And I think something like only 1 in 10 academics would describe themselves as conservative leaning. And that means that you've got 9 people standing around in a room agreeing with each other, which doesn't, in my mind, tend to point towards the fact that you'll have a better and more constructive debate. But I didn't really know where I mean, it's the long march, isn't it? It's been going on forever. It's the indoctrination of an entire generation.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I find quite interesting about kind of woke culture, critical race theory, the kind of radical identity politics we're currently dealing with is authoritarianism. Also, sometimes it feels almost quasi-religious. It's like they kind of enjoy hunting out the heretics. They enjoy publicly shaming people. It kind of lets them be virtuous and bullies at the same time. Is that kind of something you've experienced?
Oh, it is a religion. It's 100% a religion. But the problem is, it's a religion without God. So with traditional religion, there is a God figure which exists outside of yourself. Yeah. Whereas in this religion, you are the God figure. You are the judge, the juror, and everything. So it's essentially a race to the top of how ideologically sound you can be, which is on the plus side the reason why it will explode and fall apart at some point, or it needs to be. But yeah, it's terrifying how it's also so spoiled and so decadent, the woke religion, because we're all drawn, we all have an element of religiosity about us, in any way, even if it's a lack of religion. We're religious about our lack of religion, but everybody is looking to believe in something, and for some reason they've jumped on the woke bandwagon, and I find it the most repellent and divisive and regressive. I find it essentially, actually, I think that they are absolutely everything that they accuse you of. That's what I think. I think it's fundamentally very racist. I think it's very patronizing. I think it's sexist. I think it's all of the things that it's very unkind, and it's very unforgiving. So I find them, and also it doesn't stand up to much scrutiny. You sit down and have a long chat with a woke person and let them speak for long enough, they tie themselves in knots in minutes.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it's still making progress though? I mean, it feels this year like it just exploded. I mean, obviously partly probably because of the George Floyd.
I think it's on an exponential curve upwards.
I mean, is there almost a class element to this, in that it allows quite privileged people to tell very poor people that they're privileged and should shut up.
Yeah, it's a total, the sad part of it is it's all white saviordom, isn't it? Ultimately, you know, you only have to take a look at some of the hues at the Black Lives Matter marches and some of these, anarchist marches and stuff like that to see a lot of bourgeois decadent white saviors, and it's really sad. It's actually also quite racist, oddly, because they are the thing that they accuse you of, to look at someone from of a different coloured skin and believe that you in some way have to save them and to lift them up. It's extremely patronising, I find. That's what I see about it.
If you look at kind of educational attainment rates, I mean, one of the very worst performing groups is white working class boys. I mean, I don't think this is a secret. And you know, telling those guys that they've got privilege and that they've got whiteness and they're responsible for all the bad things in the world. I mean, do you think that this is actively damaging, particularly to kind of poorer people from certain backgrounds?
It's extremely bad to turn around to someone who's got no privilege at all and then tell them that, I have a great friend who's struggled right on the line all the way through his life. You know, he's just been very, very unlucky in a lot of ways. And, to add white privilege on the back of it, you know, it's just it's so divisive. We have a class problem, don't we? We have a financial inequality issue, and also there are instances of racism as well in the world. So one needs to call those out. But ultimately, we need to be trying to level the playing field as much as possible in terms of opportunity, rather than turning around and saying, you white orphan who was raised by Bernardos suddenly has a huge amount of privilege that you're unaware of. You know, I read that tweet as well, and a couple of them, and I retweeted them, and it's very hurtful for me, because I've had huge amounts of privilege. But that's, you know, that privilege is how the family I was born into, the fact that I was financially secure, that I had a very present mum and dad. You know, I have no idea what it's like to suffer what he did. But to say that we both share a privilege, when we don't, our privileges, we don't share. The only thing we share is a humanity. And we need to try and coalesce our humanity rather than create these constant identitarian divisions. It's just a sign of our decadence. It's very sad.
And where do you think this kind of woke ideology comes from? I mean, is it kind of, you know, anger over imperialism or anger over past racism? Is it the sins of our past?
I think it probably comes from, we've had a very, very cushy life for about the last period, and everyone's got their iPhone 12s or 13s or wherever, which iPhone we're on nowadays. Everyone's gone to university. Everyone lives, you know, there is obviously great poverty and bad living environments for people in this country, but the middle class have decided that they're going to virtue signal their way through life. And, you know, we're not living in a world where 150 years ago, where you'd have 5 children and the knowledge that at least 2 of them would probably die. You know, so we become extremely decadent and self-centered, and you know, we feel that we're so valuable that we're hyper individualistic, even though and at the same time they're trying to collectivize around this very, very unbalanced ideology. But I think, yeah, you can kind of blame the middle class and capitalism doing quite well for the rise of woke ideology. Yeah.
Well, I noticed that woke ideology focuses quite a lot on imperialism, or past imperialism, but only really of certain countries. So France, Britain, United States, countries that can be defined as Western, whereas countries like, you know, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, Iran with the Persian Empire, etc., they're not under any pressure to take down their history and past. I mean, do you think there's a strand of anti-Westernism within this movement?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're not even remotely on our own side, but we've allowed it to, you know, especially the critical race theory stuff, which essentially just says you cannot be white and not be racist, which is a really odd development. But we sort of hate ourselves, and I'm not quite sure why. Whereas, you know, you can obviously there's there is a nuance to history that probably could be taught more. The compromise positions with things like, you know, Churchill and all of these things. But fundamentally, we're just dismantling. They want to dismantle our history so that, you know, they own the future, don't they? You know, that's the way to do it.
Oh, so you think it's about power? They want to kind of replace our narrative with their own narrative.
Yeah, it is. It's almost the way that it's presented to us by the race theorists and by those that, you know, subscribe to all of this stuff, is that the world was doing brilliantly. It was just a beautiful, happy place where people held hands walking down desert islands and no one ever did anything mean to each other. And then along came the British Empire. And it's like, no, you know, there's horrible, horrific stuff all over the world. But again, it's that the woke way of looking at things is that there's just one reason, and one reason for everything, and that's racism, you know. And it's just like, no, there's many reasons for many things. It's called having a brain and being able to think and look at things from different angles. That's why they're so fragile intellectually, because they can't, once you start to just slightly remove racism from this conversation with some truth, then they really struggle. And then in my case, they just shout racist scum at me just all day. And I'm just like, okay, well, you know, you've succeeded in destroying my career. Thank you. Because, you know, it's such a horrible career-ending slight to be called a racist, but you have no evidence of it. And all you're actually doing is you're motivating me to challenge your ideology, because I don't want my kids growing up in a world where they're too scared to speak, which a lot of people are in a place like that nowadays.
I mean, do you think this has destroyed your career, acting-wise?
Well, who knows? I'm too busy anyway. Ultimately, you know, I love acting. I really adore it. But I also, and I spent 10 years working with Kevin Whately, who's a good old-fashioned lefty, Kev, and we had lots of robust and brilliant chats. And so, you know, it didn't affect anything. But I think because of the intellectual fragility of the argument, if you question it, that you have to be removed and sent to the mind gulag, you know, where you just sort of exist in a sort of subspecies of humanity, where you're wiped off the planet, like the, you know, Greg Clark the other day, you know, for saying something absolutely, I mean, whether you agree with him or not, but it's absolutely totally not, it's not an evil, wrong thing to say. It's just,
I mean, there's no bad intent in what he was saying. That was very obvious, I felt.
Yeah, they don't care about that. They just go like, old white dude, let's hang him out to dry. But the problem is, what they don't realize is they're all white too, and someone's going to come for them at some point as well. You know, it's like, should we just stop this and unite under something, which is the power of conversation and the power of discussion to heal and to bring people closer together? Should we not do that? Why are we tearing ourselves apart?
I mean, that's a very interesting point, because they do always eventually come for their own. And I can't think of names off the top of my head, but I can think of several examples of people who were once regarded as very progressive, who are now seen as almost beyond the pale. I mean, a big example would be J.K. Rowling, someone who, you know, when I was a kid was seen very much as kind of embodiment of Labour's Britain, progressive, and is now seen by a certain section of the left as a kind of reactionary psychopath. I mean, is this all revolutions eventually devour their own? And, you know, that's a good reason for free speech, is because eventually they're going to come for you.
I think the reason for free speech is because what we're searching for is a continuation of the conversation, isn't it? So there are some really excellent things that have come from progressivism, for example, like, you know, we don't chemically castrate gay men anymore. You know, that's a really good thing, isn't it? And also, I think there's some excellent stuff around consent and sex between men and women, which has come out of you know, general progressivism, which is great. So we want to keep that going. But life is a conversation. Life isn't. We're being spoken to now, like we've reached the apotheosis of everything, of understanding. And it's okay, right? Well, there's nowhere further to go. Welcome to utopia. And now that we're in utopia, anyone who doesn't subscribe needs to be cancelled and removed. Yeah. And we're just, you know, welcome to Russia, communism, sorry.
I mean, do you almost think that there's almost an advantage in that, taking that position as in trying to cancel your opponents? Because obviously, I mean, the position that you take, that free speech activists take, is that you don't try and get your political opponents sacked, you don't try to cost them employment and so on. But do you think it harms your chances of winning political power to do that? If you'd have a better chance of being more dominant if you adopted exactly the same tactics and go for a scorched earth policy?
No, because I believe in the truth, and the truth will always out. That's the thing. You may have to fight for it, and you may have to sacrifice for it, but it will always out. And they're not interested in anything other than the revolution. And at the end of the day, the revolution ends up eating itself. So, but I feel we're in a particularly vulnerable time at the moment, especially with the power of the internet and the lack of context that the internet provides for people to get very, very riled up very, very quickly. And, I've been thinking for a while that it could get bad. And, so then post-COVID and what's going to happen there, as society is probably going to, I mean, I'm no economist, but I'm imagining a period of quite hyperinflation, possibly, as we try and pay back the many hundreds of billions of pounds that have been thrown into the economy. And that leaves room for actually quite extremist politics to come into the fore. So one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing is to say, no, there is a very, very progressive centre area, a radically centrist position to adopt, which will hopefully fend off the rest, because we've got a hopeless government and a hopeless opposition at the moment.
So you wouldn't define yourself as left-wing or right-wing. You'd say very much you're kind of liberal centrist.
Well, I'm kind of left-wing about something, some right-wing about something else. It's really hard, isn't it? But I'm certainly anti-authoritarian. So I'm very resistant to any kind of authoritarian, and I hate having, and I suppose I'm a libertarian in a way. I mean, I'm a lot of things, but I can be right-wing, quite right. I'm quite right-wing about law and order, for example, and defence, but I'm quite left-wing about, welfare and looking after the poor. So I don't know where it fits in, but it certainly isn't. I suppose it's actually probably closer to conservatism, in the sense of the fact that what conservatism used to be, but not what it is at the moment, because we don't have a conservative government. We've got I don't know, it feels like we've got a WEF stooge.
I mean, it's I want to throw one argument at you very quickly. Yeah. And also the rise in this kind of extreme identity politics, woke politics, has really accelerated over the past few years. And much of it's coming from America. In fact, most of it seems to be coming from America. And we're pretty much importing it. I mean, do you think it's basically a reaction to Trumpism? It's, I mean, Trump is almost a kind of a caricature, a left-wing caricature of what capitalism and nationalism look like. You think that Trumpism has radicalized the left, and but now that Trump is presumably on his way out, things might start to moderate a bit more?
No, I think it's. I think Obama had a 16-year project in place, didn't he? This extreme progressive. He had the most progressive voting record, didn't he, in the American Senate? And then I think they just had planned that Hillary Clinton was going to get in and complete another 8 years of transforming America into woke utopia. And then what happened was the Americans went, no thanks, we want Trump. And now we find ourselves, it'll be very interesting to see what happens in terms of the American election. But I don't think it's so much Trumpism as a love of nation. I think Trump, whether you agree, I mean, look, he's got some interesting foibles, one would say. But so does Joe Biden, business-wise. I think that Trump represents a love of America. And I think the Democrats actually, with the 1619 project and all of this stuff, they want to redefine what America is. So they're actually trying to tear America apart. So that's my view. And I don't think I think what annoyed them was the fact that they didn't get Clinton in.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that the victory of Joe Biden, assuming it's confirmed, obviously it's based on ongoing legal action, but if it is confirmed, do you think that's basically a victory for wokedom? It's a defeat for your cause?
I don't think, no, not necessarily, because I think I don't think everyone should win all the time. I think democracy is really important, but I don't think Joe Biden is any friend of Britain at all. And I don't think he really knows what's happened. If I'm genuinely honest, I don't think he understands that his party has been hijacked by a very, very radical leftist movement, and he is representing it. And I'm not sure he totally gets what it is that's happening to who's coming up behind him. And you know, you've got a vice president-elect currently with pronouns in her bio. So that's just someone putting the middle finger up to the English language right there. You know, so this is radicalism. And no, good for him if he wins. And Trump's I mean, I can never tell from Trump's tweets because he's the weirdest tweeter in the world. He's like, 78 million, you wait. And you know, so, and you know, he's contesting the election. I think he has every right to contest the election. And then we'll see what happens. But if Biden comes in, we'll see what happens, because they'll want to turn Puerto Rico into a congressional seat and District of Columbia into a congressional seat, which means that the Republicans are probably never going to get into power again.
I mean, they probably won't be able to do that if they don't take Congress, which I don't think they've done. So that's probably a little bit on safer grounds.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was very interested in what you said about conservatism, about there being almost like a sort of problem with British conservatism. It's not standing up for itself anymore. Well, is that really why you're launching your own party? So that's the Reclaim Party.
Yes. Well, it's not because of the lack of conservatism. It's just the fact that the Conservatives aren't being remotely conservative. I mean, how can we have these hate crime laws and these, you know, non-crime hate incidents and well, I mean, self-ID is slightly changing, isn't it? Because Liz Truss has jumped in on top of it. But you know, this sort of woeful response to the attacks in France, and I'm just like, what are you conserving? Boris going on about climate change and build back better, and you're just like, this doesn't sound like conservatism to me. Conservatism to me, in a way, well, actually it's not conservatism, it's what I stand for, is essentially what I learned around the dining table when I was a kid, which is good manners, the ability to speak freely, to be able to robustly argue your position and have that position robustly disagreed with in a balanced and enjoyable way, and then to leave that table as friends. You know, and it not to be the end of your relationship, for it to continue to be an ongoing conversation. And those sorts of values, and you know, fairness, freedom, common sense, all of these values, they do need to be reclaimed, because nobody has reclaimed them for us. They're being shunted away to the side in the name of you know, whatever Boris is. I don't even know what he is anymore, in my view. And Starmer has drunk all the critical race theory Kool-Aid. So he's down on one knee 1 minute, standing up the next minute talking about using all the critical race theory language of structural inequality and it all being down to this univariant thing of race. And you're just like, no chum, that's not right. This isn't smart. Well, he's almost too smart for his own good, I suppose. But yes, the reason why we exist is to offer people an alternative. And, you know, chances of being elected to Parliament, pretty small. Chances of being able to affect politics, pretty large, I'd say.
Well, you've probably heard this analogy before, but UKIP obviously was a political party that, in terms of, you know, winning elections, other than for the European Parliament, very badly. And it got very sort of glory as a result, but it had a huge impact on British politics in pushing the Tories in the Eurosceptic direction. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking? And if that's the case, does it bother you that you won't get the glory? That, you know, it will be someone within the Tory party who starts adopting your ideas, and then they're the ones who actually end up winning the election?
Well, weirdly, it's not. It doesn't, to me, but just based on my own personal, my truth, my narrative, based on my narrative, I feel like I have a duty to do this. So I don't really, you know, I'm not egotistical enough to say that I would like to take credit for anything. I think the whole point of Reclaim is that people know what's going on anyway in their own hearts. My only job is to say culturally, you have a feeling inside of you, and you know you know that it's worth letting it out sometimes, and it's okay, and it's good for your health, and it's good for society's health for you to share what you believe about things. And that's all I want to do. Just unlock it for people. and let them know being yourself is totally fine. Your views are totally fine. Tell your own stories. You know, make a wonderful life for yourself in whatever way you wish to do it. Just don't live the life that someone else imposes on you through fear of losing your job.
So sorry to interrupt. I noticed recently that a group of 59 Tory MPs formed the Common Sense Group, which they say is to fight against, well, in defence of British culture and against kind of woke values. I mean, do you think those are people you can possibly work with? Have you been having discussions with some of those people?
I have, yeah, I have spoken to a few of them, and I am interested that even by my existence, maybe this is arrogant, but I noticed that the Tories did become markedly more Tory quite quickly when we announced, and I think the Common Sense Group is a good thing. And there are some. What's great about the Conservatives is they've got some amazing members of Parliament. So they've got Kemi Badenoch, and they've got Ben Bradley, and they've got Steve Baker, depending on what he's feeling like that day. You know, so there's a lot of good young Conservatives that are good, and you know they're going up against the Dawn Butlers and the Rebecca Long Baileys. I know which side I'd rather be on.
Did you see the speech by the Equalities Minister where she said that critical race theory can't be taught unchallenged in schools? And I think it got something like 2 or 3 million views on Twitter. I mean, did you think there's a real demand for this stuff out there?
Yes, I mean I did one 10 days earlier by some weird coincidence. A little video with a friend of mine called Calvin Robinson, and we got I
know. I interviewed Calvin a couple of days ago, funnily enough.
So we did a little video together on critical race theory, and you would have thought that wouldn't touch anybody, but I think it had well over 500,000 views on Twitter, and then well over, as the people cut it away into other things, another few 100,000. So it probably, overall had coming up to 1 million views, and that's you're talking about critical race theory. The thing about the population is that the population are actually quite smart, and we don't give them credit for it. And so what Kemi Badenoch did was she brought together a sense of righteous anger, and I suppose that is where identitarianism is useful, positive identitarianism, because I don't think if Boris had stood up and made that speech, or Dominic Raab had stood up and made that speech, it would have landed quite so much as someone who came from Nigeria when she was very young and was told to be a nurse when she was succeeding in school. So she's an absolute inspiration to me, and her bravery is to be applauded.
I mean, is your plan to start standing candidates for election, like sort of recruiting candidates?
Certainly looking at it, yeah. But I mean, the plan, whenever I say what my plan is, even if I have someone in this office, which I've now decided to empty for the last week or so, I'll start hearing one of my plans is being used. So what essentially at the moment, because we're also going through the Electoral Commission, is to be a powerful movement with the fangs of standing people should we want to stand them. There's certainly, I have a quite solid plan of what I'm going to do, but if I tell you, it'll just get nicked.
In more general terms then, hypothetically, a Laurence Fox prime ministership, what would be the policies that would be introduced?
Oh, Laurence Fox prime ministership. I think I would go very straight away into education, depoliticise education as much as possible. I would have kids learn British and European history until GCSE level. Only 40% do, and the curriculum is very generalised and non-specific. So I think it would be very good to arm kids with that. I think I would put together, I would, you try and create a common language between kids that come from very disadvantaged areas and kids that came from backgrounds like mine, which would come through those same things, that dinner table stuff of manners, oracy, learning to speak. Because the worst thing about coming from a disadvantaged background and not getting the lifts up in the world that people who come from my background get, is that will work against you most of your life. If you're not spoken to and you're not encouraged to talk and you're not asked what your opinion is and you're not given the confidence to do so. So I would definitely be working right in education at the beginning to try and stop the long march of wokeism through education and institutions, and B, try and just really level the playing field of equality of opportunity for people.
I mean, are you optimistic? Do you think the kind of the long march of wokeism is likely to be stopped, or is this kind of the last stand of a certain type of liberalism?
No, it's going to stop. Well, I think we're copying America, aren't we? And certainly there is a, with the Black Lives Matter movement now registering themselves as a political party, I think their threat has been somewhat nullified by stuff like Kemi Badenoch's speech and stuff like this. But I think the march of the extreme revolutionary radical leftists is coming at great speed for us. And who knows? It certainly feels to me that it would only take one incident to really set, one George Floyd type incident to happen in the UK for all of these things to unravel very quickly. And you wouldn't, one doesn't want violence ever. But, it's very interesting to note that since the American election result happened, there hasn't been any rioting, looting or fires being set. Isn't that interesting? So it seems to be only one side that likes setting things on fire until you vote for them or do what they say.
I mean, it's you say about sorry, I lost my train of thought. One thing that you mentioned is obviously young people. I mean, do you think that woke politics is very much concentrated amongst the youth? And obviously that's a bad sign of that. I mean, I read somewhere that you try and avoid dating women under 35 because they're just too woke. I don't know if that's still the case. And
I think that they concentrate on kids. Yeah, I think that it's kind of pretty shameful. But my kids are, as an example, and the children I know are highly politicized from a very, very young age. And it's not a good idea to do it. So yeah, I think as who was it? Is it Socrates or Plato or who said, "Give me a boy for 7 years and I'll show you the man." That's I think one of the smart ones. So yeah, I think it's certainly they're aiming for the youth, but also young people are. I was extremely idealistic when I was young about things, so that's completely understandable. But it wasn't so narrow and brutal as this form of ideology is. So yes, you do, but I do notice interestingly, I notice another difference as well. So I notice that there's a certain strata of both men and women in a certain age who seem to really adopting this sort of miserable millennial attitude. And then those just beneath them. So I've got a friend who's got a 16-year-old daughter and she's as sound as a pound, You never know, it might just be passing through, but I doubt it.
Just the millennials, and then, but is it Generation Y or Generation X after that? Whichever's after that is going to be fine.
Yeah, hopefully.
I mean, you mentioned your kids a couple of times. It's obviously something you're very concerned about. I mean, do you feel that they're being politicized at school by teachers or by some kind of academic institution?
Well, they, I mean, my children will say things that I'm astonished that they say. But I mean, at the end of the day, you want to encourage the freedom of speech and expression. But I know certainly that there was an announcement that Trump had COVID, and that announcement was made in public in the school. And, there was a sort of, you can cheer now if you want to. And, they're very, people are very heavily indoctrinated kids against Trump, my friends' kids, and, they all hate Trump. And I'm like, well, you can't all hate him because half of America voted for him. So I imagine half of the people in the UK, they're shy Trumpers. That's what they are, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, I just don't want my kids growing up. I would like my kids to grow up and go, I want them to be as least spoiled as possible because they are very privileged kids, my kids. And one would like them to be able to have good relationships with anybody from any background or, whatever. What are the other discerning? I mean, I just see everyone as human beings. So it's very difficult for me I'm not very good at being intersectional.
I mean, just one final question. I mean, do you feel that there's a sort of strain of Puritanism with this? in that, say, the desire to cancel, the desire to control, the desire to take away things which are regarded as pleasurable, but which are in some way slightly not evil, but there's something slightly wrong with them. I mean, do you think it kind of appeals to a certain personality type, which is very similar to the type who might have been tempted by certain types of religious fundamentalism in the past, I say Puritanism?
Certainly. We don't like, we've attacked the whole idea of chivalric behavior and stuff like this, and opening doors for women and toxic masculinity and all of this stuff, and then it leads on into this extreme misogyny of the trans activists and stuff like this. It's a sort of, well, what do they call them on the internet? Cucks.
Yeah.
This sort of beta male way of looking at things, of promoting. But the stupid thing about it is there's no such thing as an alpha male or a beta male. Certain people have strengths in certain areas and other people have strengths in other areas. It's not really such a thing. There's definitely been an attack on masculinity, and I possibly in a puritanical drive for equality. But we always tend to avoid the stats when we talk about all of this stuff. But yeah, in terms of Puritanism, it's deeply puritanical, the whole thing, and repellent as a result of it. Because who wants to live in a puritanical world?
Yeah. Well, Laurence, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. We'll follow your party with interest. I think you're going to be quite lively, I suspect.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, great. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thanks for talking. Lovely talking to you.